Welcome to the United Survivors webinar, Advancing Suicide Prevention Through Advocacy, Stories, Tips, Ideas, and Inspiration to Make an Impact. We have two amazing, extremely experienced guests that have lots and lots of tips for us on how we can turn some of our pain, our lived experience into purpose to create broad cultural change. I'm Sally Spencer-Thomas. I am president of United Survivors, and I'm going to turn it over to our vice president, Ursula Whiteside, who has a very important memorial for us to observe.
Today, we're honoring the life and legacy of Diana Cortez Llanes. Diana was an important part of United Survivors. She passed away several weeks ago from complications due to an ongoing medical illness. And she was just such a bright spot in our organization. Not only was she involved in helping with Spanish speaking webinars, but also just the spirit that she brought, and her energy was, I think, so valuable to this field. She devoted her life to using her lived experience of having been in the psychiatric system and surviving suicide attempts to help improve the care that health systems provided for people who were struggling with suicidal thoughts. And we were just so lucky to have her. This webinar is in honor of her.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here tonight. I'm Jen Mattoni, the Associate Director of Programs and Communications for United Survivors. We put the lived expertise of suicide attempt and loss survivors into action through leadership, collaboration, and advocacy, and we help people turn pain into purpose. We work to leverage the voices of lived experience to advocate for policy, system, and cultural change, and that's exactly what we'll be talking about tonight. And just a little bit now about our programs. So we're very involved with the National Workplace Guidelines for Suicide Prevention, and you can learn more about that at workplacesuicideprevention.com. We also offer storytelling courses and retreats that help you determine if you're ready to share your lived experience story, and also how to share it effectively and safely. And of course, storytelling is a very important part of advocacy work, which we'll be talking about more in depth tonight. We also have a 4-part series of men's mental health books called Guts, Grit, and the Grind. And those also feature the stories of dozens of men. We also have our webinar series that we do on relevant topics, and we always incorporate voices of lived experience. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. G. Williams is Advocacy Associate with the Trevor Project. Trevor is the nation's largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ young people. So G collaborates with the organization's advocacy team to research and advocate for stronger suicide prevention policy, primarily supporting work in school suicide prevention, and they also manage the corporate advocacy program and work with corporate partners to provide interactive training on advocacy, allyship, and political engagement. And before joining Team Trevor, G worked as a political consultant on campaigns across the state of Florida and attended Howard University, where they studied political science. So thrilled to have G here with us tonight. And now I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dr. Susan Marine. Susan completed her doctorate in sociology at the University of Minnesota. Her professional career has been varied, and she was on the faculty of the University of Colorado's Department of Preventative Medicine. Susan later worked at the Western Interstate Commission of Higher Education, and for a number of years, she worked as a consultant. Susan also works as a lobbyist for a coalition of liberal churches. Her last paying job was with a community mental health center doing evaluation research. She's a survivor of suicide loss. She lost her son in 2003 and her daughter in 2007. She's on the board of the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Colorado. And over the past decade, she's helped pass a number of bills related to suicide prevention, and was also awarded a national award, the Field Advocate of the Year Award by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. She has also received many awards for her advocacy work.
I appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight. First off, I just want to say thank you so much to you all for having me here. It's such a pleasure to be in this room with you all and share this virtual space and be in community with folks who have, sort of similar relationships to this really serious topic. I want to invite you all to take a deep breath with me. I know that this topic is intense for us all. It's deeply personal for us all. And anytime I start speaking, I just want to invite everybody to sort of take a deep breath and pull yourself to a place of being centered so that, we're all centering sort of the safety that we need in order to have and engage serious topics like this. I sort of feel like, and I always joke that I really had no choice but to get into advocacy work. I was hit with sort of the quadruple whammy of being born femme presenting, being born half Black, being born queer in my sexuality, and then later in life realizing that I was very much queer in my gender identity and presentation as well. And so I sort of had no choice. I realized that the person that I was, sort of destined to be was probably not going to be a person that found myself in a lot of spaces that were meant for me. And creating those spaces was going to be part and parcel with my own sort of relationship to figuring out a way to stay alive and want to stay alive. And in the suicide prevention space, it was deeply personal to me because I struggled a lot with suicidality all throughout growing up. I always just sort of had this sense of not fitting where I found myself to be and not really knowing how to deal with that in any way. And really being so overwhelmed by the just multitude of suffering it felt like I was seeing all around me. And I think eventually somewhere in my adolescence, I took that deep breath that I encouraged us all to take together just a second ago. And I realized the only way I'm going to find spaces that are made for me is if I make them. The only way I'm going to find, a way to and a reason to sort of stay in this life is if I create the life that I want and that I feel like is worth staying alive for. And I do that for my siblings, sort of in the fight for a better world. So I got involved in advocacy work when I was young and just sort of fell in love with the community of people that are all sort of involved in advocacy work as well.
I got involved in advocacy through some of the jobs that I had when I worked at the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. We worked closely with the state government in the 13 Western states. Sometime later, I worked as a lobbyist for a consortium of progressive churches. And I was on the board of the local community mental health center here in Boulder, and I chaired their advocacy committee. About half of the persons who die of suicide have a diagnosable mental health condition. I did lose both of my children. My son was bipolar and given to rapid cycling, and he suffered with depression, serious depression over a number of years before he lost the struggle. And about 4 years after he died, my daughter Alice also took her life. And for me, advocacy has been finding meaning out of loss.
Thank you so much, G and Susan. One of our main focuses, as I mentioned before, is to help people affected by suicide to turn pain into purpose. Have you seen any inspiring examples of people doing this that you would like to highlight?
The first bill that I was involved with was co-sponsored by a state senator who had grown up in a family where her father was a psychologist, and every night at dinner, he talked about the cases that he was seeing. And this senator then lost her husband to suicide, and her two daughters had lists of people who had lost the struggle. And in many ways, she was an ally and a mentor. And we went on to pass a couple more bills that never would have been possible without her leadership and willingness to work with me as an advocate to pull together a grassroots advocacy effort to pass those bills.
I love this question. And I think one of the reasons I love this question is because it gives me the opportunity to really brag about the brilliant people that I get to work with on a daily basis. So, as Jen mentioned, the Trevor Project is the world's leading suicide prevention and crisis services organization. And one of the really awesome parts of getting to work for the Trevor Project is getting to be a representative of the Trevor Project as I move throughout the world. It's such a cool thing to be wearing like sort of a company sweater that has a logo on it, or wearing a backpack that has a logo on it, and have youth or parents or, adults come up to me and talk about their sort of like incredible experience calling into our hotline or using our text and chat features and sort of getting the care that they needed in their most vulnerable moment. And I think a lot about the folks who are on the front lines of the work that the Trevor Project does. Our crisis services staff are often, folks who are survivors of loss or attempts themselves, and who sort of have decided through their own experiences to dedicate their life to being that line of defense for folks that are in crisis and need the aid. One thing about LGBTQ youth experiencing suicide is that the rates of LGBTQ youth are 4 times that of their cisgender peers in terms of experiencing suicide crisis. So we know that this particular community is at exponential risk for suicide. And oftentimes these young people are also people that don't have the support system in their home lives and in their home communities that they need to sort of navigate that crisis. And so the work that the Trevor Project does and the work that those crisis services workers do really does make a difference. And I think that it's one of the most inspiring things for me to see all those people, all the people that I sort of interact with on a daily basis. And you know how it is with coworkers when you interact with them and you sort of only see them in that realm, and then to take a step back and to think, wow, this is a person who, in their youth or, in their lifetime has experienced intimately the effects of suicide crisis and took that pain that they experienced and turned it into being on the front lines of something like what the Trevor Project does. So special to me.
Awesome. So would love to also just hear in general some more about your experiences as an advocate and some accomplishments that you're the most proud of, or like what impact you've been able to have with your advocacy.
The immediate impact that I can point to is the passage of about 7 bills that have dealt with suicide prevention in one way or another. And identifying allies and working with allies at the Capitol has been very important and very effective. And I've also formed collaborative relationships with other nonprofits operating in the mental health suicide prevention area. And because of those collaborative relationships, I think we've been more successful in passing bills, because the Suicide Prevention Coalition itself is a relatively small organization of members across the state. So the important thing to me about passing a bill is that I can affect change across the state of Colorado. My immediate hope, though, is to spare other parents the kind of loss that I've suffered. And it's really quite a wonderful and exciting feeling when the governor actually signs a bill into law.
And I think I actually just saw a photo of you with the governor and a few other people
Yeah.
as well for something that was just signed, correct,
Yeah,
Susan?
on
Just this
Friday.
week?
Yeah, just on Friday. Yeah, great feeling.
Congrats.
But something that I'm definitely proud of, sort of has a little bit of lead up to it. Anybody who is really paying attention to what LGBTQ policy looks like right now knows that we're experiencing just a barrage of anti-LGBTQ legislation. It's intense. And I've had a lot of close friends and family members and community members sort of reach out to me in a panic, just paying attention to the sheer number of anti-trans bills that have been introduced since the start of the legislative session in January. And something that I like to come back to for myself when I get overwhelmed with it, and what I like to tell folks, something I'm really, truly proud of, is that, last year was the biggest year for anti-trans legislation that we'd seen in a long, long while. And this year it looks the same. And last year, the LGBTQ policy movement was able to beat over 90% of the anti-LGBTQ bills introduced. So we have a really wonderful success rate when we work together as a community. And fight these bills back. And so I think the biggest advocacy success story I can tell is a story of community. It's a story of a group of different organizations, people, like student groups, all banding together towards a similar cause, and using the strengths that each individual group, brings to the table towards that cause, and being able to fight back and mitigate harm in a really serious, impactful way.
That is amazing impact you've had.
Absolutely. So any lessons that you learned along the way, or maybe some tips that you might have for people who are looking to get involved?
I am a Florida kid through and through. I was raised in St. Petersburg, Florida, and got involved in advocacy while I was still a teenager in the state. And I first really cut my teeth on advocacy on a really local level. I got involved in a mayoral campaign, and sort of broke my big rule about working like unpaid internships, because I cared so much about the campaign, and very, very quickly thankfully was offered a job there, and sort of lost myself in the world of electoral politics at a very local, pared down level. And it was probably the singular best decision I've ever made for myself, to just to do the thing, to get involved, to lose myself into that world of local politics, because it allowed me to learn so much about where change is actually made. I think that it's really easy for us to tell ourselves a story that there are very important people in big important rooms where decisions are made, and it comes down from the top and affects us all. But I think that anytime I've ever seen change that affects the day-to-day lives of individuals and the livelihood of people, most of the time it's coming from those small rooms with local politicians, local community members, sort of all getting together and trying to figure out a way to manage a collective. And so my biggest piece of advice to folks wanting to get involved, and the biggest lesson I've ever learned in politics, is that politics is a grassroots game, right? The people are the ones with the power, if they choose to take that power. And the only time anything has ever gotten done is when a group of dedicated people decided to do it. So the biggest decision I think any one person can make is to be one of those people.
When I first started my advocacy work in Colorado, suicide was actually a partisan issue, right down party lines. All the Republicans voted against it, and Democrats would vote for it. And at this point, it has changed immensely. The last bill that I worked on had unanimously positive votes all the way through the House and the Senate, which was really quite remarkable. About a quarter of our state population is out in rural areas, and the people out there have a somewhat different mindset, and they often think that the urban areas don't care about them. And, I really found that I needed to be able to talk with Democrats and Republicans and people in urban and rural areas of the state. And finding existing resources has been very important to me. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention issues a series of issue briefs on different topics. And I've often used those as a sort of a baseline for some of the legislation that we decided that we wanted to work on. And sometimes it's a pragmatic decision in terms of, what can we reasonably get passed that's going to have potentially a very significant impact that doesn't have a fiscal note. The other thing that I think is changing is the stigma that has surrounded suicide. It is now possible to see on the floor of our Senate legislators talking about their personal struggles with depression in their own suicide attempts. So aside from passing laws, there's been sort of a shift in attitudes.
Yeah, I've seen that as well, Susan, with senators also talking about their own losses to suicide. So yes, I'm glad to hear it's a nonpartisan issue, especially these days. That's good to have. G, did you want to tell us more about the Trevor Project's advocacy work and how people can get involved?
The Trevor Project's advocacy team works at the state, federal, and local levels to advance legislation that protects LGBTQ young people. We also fight back against legislation that would do active harm. And we have a number of different issue areas that we work within, ranging, sort of all the way from our proactive work in the conversion therapy and anti-discrimination space. We have our reactive work, which is sort of responding to this barrage of the anti-LGBTQ legislation that I've been sort of talking a little bit about tonight. We also have our school policy work, which works with administrators and school boards across the country to ensure that adults that serve youth in school environments are sort of trained in suicide prevention, intervention, and detection, and that youth are trained in how to be good bystanders and to understand the role that they sort of serve in their community, to understand the risk of suicide. We work with a number of different state organizations to sort of do work in the states. And if you're interested in getting involved with the Trevor advocacy work that we have, you can go to thetrevorproject.org and go to the advocacy page on our website. And there are a whole host of ways that you can get involved in the work that we do. There's also a number you can text to get involved in the work that we do.
I would like to mention the importance of finding an organization into which you can fit to do your advocacy work. I don't think it's terribly effective to be one person working out there alone. Whether it's a Trevor Project, SVCC, NAMI, AFSP, find the organization that best fits you and then work under that umbrella, because it provides legitimacy and support. And most important, perhaps, are the members who respond to advocacy alerts, letting people know, what the important issues are, where their advocacy is needed. And the other thing that we've done is we have a suicide prevention day at the Capitol. SVCC is one part of that, AFSP, Colorado chapter, NAMI, and Mental Health Colorado.
Yes, we have something similar in my state as well with AFSP Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Coalition for Suicide Prevention. And I've participated a number of times, and it's great to just get together with this community of people where we're all feeling passionate. I know I've learned a lot. And then also for me, having the opportunity to share briefly with my representatives my own lived experience story. So could you guys talk a little bit more about the importance of lived experience stories when it comes to advocacy?
Well, whenever I testify in a committee, I always mention that I am the mother of 2 children who died of suicide. I think that legislators listen harder, if you will, when we acknowledge our own experience. I also would have to say, though, that it took me a while to get to the point where I was ready to be an advocate. My daughter had died 6 years before I started working on advocacy. And, I really needed that time to process that myself and get to a point where I could feel okay telling about my experience.
I really appreciate Susan going first and sharing that. Something that I believe is deeply true is that when you do this kind of work, whether that be mental health and suicide policy, LGBTQ policy, right? The politics is personal. It's never sort of separate from what we're doing. And I think that that's what makes the work good. I think that that's what makes it quality. I think that's what connects with the people who are making decisions and creating policy. And I think that that is the only way to really speak to the folks that are in the crisis themselves, to trust that the folks that are fighting for them and not the idea of like some vague problem that they're having, but that the problem itself is a human problem. The problem itself is a real, human person in a struggle and not just a vague idea. And so the importance of survivors sort of coming into the space and doing the advocacy work is really the importance of the work getting done in the way that it should.
Great. Thank you both. So for people who are looking to get involved, are there particular kinds of skills or qualities that people should have? Like what is needed to participate in advocacy, would you say? What is helpful?
Showing up exactly and 100% the way that you are.
Yeah.
That's my answer. I full stop there. The work needs you, period. However you are, that's how you should show up, because it's about us. It's not about somebody else. It's about you and the community you serve and the perspectives that you have, and the talent that you have, which is innate, the worth that you have, which is innate, and contributing that to advocacy work, it will make it better no matter who you are.
And I think in the beginning, it's really helpful to go along with somebody who's experienced it, because I think some people are put off by, these legislators who know so much and they don't know what we know. And being part of an organization, I think is, critical.
Thank you. I feel like you covered this, but just in case, why is it important for people to get involved in advocacy? Any more thoughts on that?
Legislators listen better when you are a survivor.
This isn't anybody else's world but ours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think we will move to some of the questions now that are in the chat. What are the risks of doing advocacy that you have run into? And could you give some guidance on the risk-taking side, the pros and cons?
I really appreciate this question. I think that it's really easy to talk about advocacy as this really fun sort of mystical place to work, and you feel like you're doing great work and it's all sunshine and roses, but like advocacy work, especially advocacy work in the suicide prevention realm, is intense. It's deeply personal. It's sad. Something that I've encountered that I didn't anticipate, but is 100% my experience, is that when I go out and I represent Trevor, either at conferences or if I'm just traveling for personal reasons, but I'm wearing my Trevor backpack, people will talk to me about their suicide crisis or their relationship with suicide, which is such a privilege to hold that space of safety in people's hearts and minds, and also an intense thing to encounter on a regular basis the way that I have. And so there's a certain part of yourself that you give up to a community space, and the skills of setting boundaries and communicating needs are just like things that you have to develop in order to sort of be in the space and to be an advocate. I also think that like you open yourself up to the risk of a lot of people disagreeing with you loudly and in your face. And sometimes those people don't have good intentions for you or for your safety. And so that's like a real hard thing that you have to grapple with when you advocate for, I think probably folks in marginalized communities. Unfortunately, that's like a real experience that I've encountered a lot. And it's, like I said, all of this, it's deeply personal. And so there is no real way to separate. There's no way to lend all of the humanity that you're bringing to the advocacy work and then separate out that humanity when it comes to people disagreeing with you and people, maybe meaning you less than wonderful things, right? So hold yourself deeply in care and in tenderness, and understand that ultimately the benefit of helping people and being in community is worth the risks that are undeniable.
Yeah, I would say you're courageous. In terms of the risk, you're exposing yourself, you're vulnerable when you put yourself out there. There's always a risk that somebody's going to be really unpleasant, rude. Some legislator who had told me a year ago that he was going to be there when it came to suicide prevention research. As it turned out, he was opposed to the bill this year. And I was a little fortunate in that we have a part-time lobbyist, and he was the one who was most exposed, if you will. He has no personal history with suicide, but it can be emotional, and I think that you have to be ready and willing to tell your story, and it takes sometimes years, I think, to get there.
Thank you, Susan. And we had a question here. Any recommendations from the panelists on how to take the first step if legislative advocacy is intimidating?
Identify somebody who can be a mentor, I think is really important, and find the organization that you fit with.
I definitely second everything that Susan said. I think mentorship is important, and it can be incredibly helpful. And I think finding a good organization, I think most specifically for me, I would recommend local and state organizations. Folks that are closest to the communities that you live in and operate in are really useful resources. I think also a piece of advice I have for you is, when you want to eat a whole pie, you don't just bury your face in it. You take one bite at a time. And so my advice to anybody who wants to get involved in any, sort of legislative work is to just pick one singular bill, one bill that's been introduced, and just follow it. Take this legislative session to be the learning legislative session. Find a bill in your state legislator and follow it from when it's introduced to if and when it becomes a law, and just genuinely learn as much as you can about that process and that one bill that you really care about, and try and find the other people that are working in that space, because there will always be people working in the space, and learn what you can from them. And when you feel more comfortable with that process, try and follow more the next time, and more until, you feel like you're as involved as you need to be.
Great advice. And we had a question from our friend and colleague, Rosie Bowder, in the chat that says, I'm curious to hear from the panelists about ways that they're sustained in their advocacy, especially because it can be so personal.
Hopefully you'll be surrounded with some people who are supportive of what you're doing, and, talk about it, get advice about how to handle it, take care of yourself. I think it's so important when being out there, that you have to be able to rest your soul and be regenerated in whatever way is meaningful to you.
My big piece of advice for folks is going to sound so big and nebulous, but this is for real. I always tell, especially young folks when they're first starting to get into advocacy space, that something that you need to know and feel deep in your heart and in your bones is that no legislator or big, important, scary person can tell you and actually make it so that you are not worthy of care, attention, and survival and happiness in your survival. That is innate, that no one can take it away from you, that the reality of what goes on in the legislator can exist and be scary, and also you will still be worthy of survival and happiness in that survival. And that when it starts to feel like maybe that's not true, it's time to take a step away.
Right.
It's time to really nurture that belief and make sure that belief is a fire burning bright inside you, always, every step of the way. And that hopefully, like Susan said, there will be people around you that keep that fire stoked that entire time. And if you're not finding that, go find those people before you do the advocacy, because that's what will make the advocacy work. Benevolent leadership is not going to liberate us. We will liberate us. And the way we do that is by believing in our bones that we are worthy of survival and happiness and survival.
Thank you so much. And let's see, our president, Sally, had a question for Susan. She says, I think you taught me that it only takes just a handful of letters and calls from citizens to sway a legislator who may be on the fence about an issue. Is that right? And if so, how do we know how to best approach them?
Well, within the Suicide Prevention Coalition, we send out action alerts to our members, and it briefly describes the bill, why it's important. And then we give them some tips about either what they should say on a phone call or that they should send in an email. So we give them all the information they need. And if you don't have that, it's not quite so easy to advocate, but we send them the menu, so to speak. And it is true that all legislators really need are, 2 or 3 meaningful messages, especially from their own constituents, and that will sway them in many cases.
Now is my time, I think, to probably plug the Trevor Project's own little messaging service that we have. If you go again to trevorproject.org/advocacy, you can sign up for these text blasts that we send out to folks. And it's this action blast that we have where folks that are maybe located in a certain municipality or state or something along those lines have the opportunity to engage in advocacy when we know from our state partners that it is deeply needed in that area. And so, I mean, obviously, I want to plug the Trevor Projects, but find the state organizations that work in your area. I'm sure they have services like that too. Sign up for their newsletters, sign up for their communications. They will point you in the direction of where constituent action is most needed. And then my advice is to bug those legislators until they're sick of you and they can identify you by name, because this is absolutely correct. It only takes a few really persistent folks making clear what they feel about legislation to sway a legislator into supporting or not supporting a bill.
Someone had also put in the chat, do legislators actually read these letters and these emails and these voicemails that they get? And I can say from personal experience, I often get emails back from my legislators saying, we've gotten your message, and letting me know kind of what they're working on and how they might incorporate some of my concerns and my things that I'm asking for into what they're working on. And I've even gotten, personal, responses from my direct legislators, not from a staff member, which is really awesome when you get those. There's some follow-up here. When I learned that just a handful of voices could make a difference, I felt incredibly empowered. I have also gone to my legislators' office hours that they have. They're looking for people to come by and chat. So I've gone and visited, and it's a way to really, start building a relationship with them, because I think that really helps when they know you, they know what you care about. And I think, that also helps to get the personal replies back from them. Sometimes they come into the community and have coffee, just have like a coffee chat with the community. And so I've gone and met them at restaurants when I knew they were going to be there, and just, say hi again. And, oh, I wanted to remind you that this is what I'm looking for.
We have town halls as well, and
Yes, absolutely.
and show up.
Another question that says, what keeps you going when the going gets tough?
My awesome community of advocates that are competent and caring and able to take on the fight when I am too tired to keep going, so that I can rest, which is a deeply productive act for anybody, and get back into the fight when I am ready.
I would say the support of friends and family and the people I'm working with on advocacy. The support system is really important.
We've been talking about the importance of lived experience stories in advocacy work. And so I wanted to mention a little bit more about our storytelling program. We have online courses, which are self-paced. There are 2 of those. And one of them is more of an introductory course where you can get ready to tell your lived experience story. It helps you to weigh the pros and cons of sharing your hero's journey, and also gets you to think about self-care. And just, there's so many considerations around sharing your story. And these courses really go into detail around that, which many people find very, very helpful. Our more advanced course is Eye of the Survivor, Your Hero's Journey about Surviving Suicide, and how to tell your story safely and effectively. Because of course, when we share these stories, there are things that we need to be careful of that we're sharing safely. So we offer also retreats, and we love to do them in person. We have done them also as hybrids and some virtual retreats. You can check out more about our storytelling program on our website, unitesurvivors.com. We've also been talking tonight about some of these other advocacy opportunities. The National Alliance on Mental Illness has an advocacy program, Mental Health America, AFSP, as we've mentioned a number of times. And a lot of times they will make it so easy for you where you can just get these alerts emailed to you, and the form letters all there. You just plug in a sentence or 2 about why this matters to you. It's an quick and easy way to personalize it, and it's all pretty automated, so it makes it really, really fast. So that's one way we always encourage people to get involved, because it's not a big time commitment at all. That's a great way to start as well. So please, of course, see us on the socials. And we're on all of them pretty much. We have our YouTube channel where our webinars live, and also on our website. Susan NG, any closing thoughts or anything that you didn't have a chance to share that you wanted to, or anything that we may have left out?
I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me into this space to be in community with you all, and I really appreciate it. It was really wonderful, and I'd like to thank Susan so much for being a wonderful co-panelist.
Yeah, I feel honored to be on the same panel with you, G.
And thank you everyone so much for joining us. We hope to see you at our next webinar.